of benzodiazepine use. So using it, well, this is part of the reason we're doing this podcast or video as well, to let people know these are very widely prescribed drugs, and they are not safe to take for more than 2 weeks or a month at the absolute maximum. And if you take them longer than that and you end up addicted, or dependent, which means that you'll suffer withdrawal symptoms on their cessation, you are going to be one sorry person. Some people, have a better time of it when they stop their use than others. But enough people have a terrible time so that it's an absolute, it's a medically induced epidemic. It's a complete bloody catastrophe. Yeah. It's probably worse than the opiate epidemic, and that's really saying something. So, and I don't know if I'm out of it or not. I have a hard time believing how much better I feel than I did 2 weeks ago. It doesn't seem plausible. So, it's possible that things will just deteriorate for me again, although I don't feel like that at the moment. I feel like things are put back together in an important way. Fortunately, one thing I've been able to continue doing through all of this is I'm writing a new book, and it's due in the middle of July, and that's going quite well. And I was able to do that even when I was in these different clinics, hospitalized in all these different clinics. Although I don't think I did any writing in Russia.
No.
Not until the very end.
Yeah. At the very end, you did before we went to Florida.
Yeah.
You were editing.
Yeah. Well, I remembered one other thing we were going to discuss. Some people, okay, first of all, I've had a tremendous amount of support from family members and friends. Like, really, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. People have gone far beyond the call of duty to help me and Tammy and I in the last year and a half. And there's been an unbelievably massive outpouring of public support, which has really taken me by surprise in some sense, because, it's one thing to express your condolences if you're discussing someone who, like my wife, is suffering from something clearly that's clearly not of her making, cancer, for example. But a dependence is more ethically questionable, right? Because you think, well, everyone thinks, well, what did the person obviously made some errors in choice that contributed to this. And that's a reasonable objection. And despite the fact that there are many people who found that their opinions didn't align with mine, let's say, the proportion of negative comments I got about what I was going through was very small. So that was really something. But nonetheless, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today was the fact that, what's the old saying? Physician, heal thyself, right? I wrote a self-help book. I'm a psychologist. It's like, well, why the hell didn't I see this coming? And why wasn't I more cautious? And I think those are reasonable questions.
Why should people take advice?
Well, and then that's the next question is, why should people take anything I say seriously because of that? And I guess what I would say is, if you're going to wait to learn from people who don't make mistakes, or don't have tragedy enter their life, you're going to spend a long time waiting to learn something. And the second thing I would say is, in my lectures and my writings, I've never suggested that I was anything other than one of the people who also needed to learn these lessons.
When I was 17 and had my ankle and hip done, I took OxyContin, a high dose of OxyContin for a year. And getting off of that, I experienced physical withdrawal, no psychological withdrawal. So lots of people aren't aware of the difference between psychological and physical dependence.
Yeah, and that's basically the difference between abuse and dependence.
Yeah, and physical withdrawals means your body gets used to the drug that you're on, and when you take it away, it's as if your body's missing something.
Yes.
So with
that's what I had with benzodiazepines.
Yeah. So it's actually difficult to find, it's nearly impossible to find physicians that know how to treat neurological damage done by benzodiazepines.
And so, maybe we're confident enough that we've come out the other side of it, at least to some degree, that we were willing to risk making this interview, this video. And so, and the reason we're doing it, apart from telling people that they should be exceptionally careful with benzodiazepine prescriptions, and like a very large number of elderly people are prescribed benzodiazepines, most of them women, but plenty of men too. And you do that at your peril. It also increases the risk of dementia quite substantially. So that's a lovely additional benefit. So watch it. It's a catastrophe that benzodiazepines are being prescribed the way they are so broadly. And so there's that. But then also we felt that because, I don't know how you'd say it, because people had been party to my certain elements of my private life and me to theirs, perhaps, that it was morally obligatory to bring people who are interested up to date on what's occurred. So far, so good. It's been nice to see you and Andre get a break for at least a couple of weeks. And it's been really nice not to be terrified out of my mind for...
One of the things with benzodiazepine dependence is it increases your seizure risk after you stop taking them. So this is how serious, to give an example about how serious this physical dependency can be, is for some people, even on a low dose of benzodiazepines, if they become dependent on it and stop, they can have seizures. That's how intense the brain changes can be.
Right.
So
on each seizure increases the risk of the next one.
You've been at a seizure risk for 6 months. You're still, if you're not on anticonvulsants, so then you have tremors everywhere and you're at a seizure risk.
Right.
That's ridiculous for 6 months after taking a
after
drug.
Stopping. Well, that's right.
Yeah,
because
stopping completely.
Well, it's interesting too, because I was so appalled by what the benzodiazepines had done that, I went from 4 milligrams a day to 0 last May, and that wasn't tolerable. So I went back up, but not to full.
Part of the reason you did that is people would be like, why would you do that? You're supposed to taper. First of all, if you don't know about benzodiazepines, it's not obvious that you have to taper. But you also went to a psychiatrist to deal with your worsening anxiety that you thought was mainly attributed to mom's cancer. And his suggestion was try ketamine and stop the benzodiazepines.
Right.
So that was the first psychiatrist we tried.
Yes.
Right. And we saw at least 5 of them in different areas before we got to Russia. So
I don't remember I think it's 1 prescription either in 7 or 1 prescription in 9 in the United States is either for opiates or benzodiazepines. So that's obviously a huge proportion of the prescriptions. And it's very probable that someone in your family is currently taking benzodiazepines or will be prescribed them in the future for long enough to develop a dependence. It's like, people need to know this. It's not good. Those drugs are for short-term treatment of stress-induced anxiety.
Or for surgery. They are used in surgery and things.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a long-term treatment, they're a complete catastrophe.
Yeah. And not everybody, there'll be the person or two that'll say, well, I took them and I got off of them.
Yeah.
And that's true. But it seems, if you look at the statistics, if you're older, in September saying they'd gotten off of multiple drugs, and that benzodiazepines had been the most difficult by far. Mm-hmm. People with experience with opiates as well, or heroin or something, said benzodiazepine was a completely different.
Well, I'd had bouts of depression before last fall, let's say, in my life. And I would have to say those were among the worst experiences of my life. But I'd have to say that after searching long and hard for something that was worse than depression, I finally discovered it in akathisia. Because depression was, remember, we talked about that, right? And because you had suffered bouts of depression as well as the arthritis. And one definition we'd agreed on was that being depressed was like hearing that your dog had just died.
Yeah.
And remembering that continually. And then
It's
your
way
dog
worse.
died and
Yeah.
you thought that, and that was a dog you actually liked a lot. You thought, well, that's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as depression.
Not even close.
Right.
Not even close. I thought it was going to be as bad, but then my dog died and I was like, nah, depression is way worse. Sucks the joy out of absolutely everything. Can't even see colors vividly.
Mhm.
Like the joy out of seeing colors, which you don't even think there's joy associated with that. But
Right. Because, well, with severe depression, you lose positive emotion and gain a lot of negative emotion. But with this akathisia, it was like all of the negative emotion associated with depression, plus a very high level of anxiety, plus no positive emotion at all, plus the inability to ever relax, even for a moment. And so it was,
yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes.
So watch the hell out for benzodiazepines. They're probably not your friend, or if they are, they're not your friend for very long. So,
Yeah. And one of the weird things, I was prescribed lorazepam for sleep. I didn't take it very often because I found it didn't work very well. Thank goodness.
I think that for me, it's no overstatement that to say that for me, the consequence of benzodiazepine withdrawal were worse than death. So
Yes, that is what it looked like from the outside.
yes, well, it, you know, you don't want to say something like that lightly, you know, but there were lots of times, plenty of times when it would have been preferable, as far as I could tell, just not to be there than to experience what I was experiencing.
When you're in pain, people who are in, being at a certain level of pain is like that. Right.
Yes.
If you're walking around, anything over really like a 7 or an 8, you can't stand it.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like from the outside.
Well, the other thing that the benzodiazepine withdrawal did that was absolutely dreadful was produce a sense of time distortion. So this was really obvious when I first woke up in Russia. Like the first day that you and I could speak again, you were wheeling me around in the aisle of the corridor of the intensive care unit. I was going to be wheeled around until it was time to eat. And I must have asked you how many times in 10 minutes what time it was.
Probably every 45 seconds.
Yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah.
And that's because for me, it felt like, a substantial amount of time had passed, an hour or 2 hours, something like that, some terrible amount of time. And so not only was I in pain and experiencing extremely high levels of anxiety, the duration of time had extended so that it was really unbearable. It was like the days were just lasting forever. And that actually disappeared quite a bit as the akathisia disappeared. And it isn't the case now, thank God, but it was brutal. It's funny, even now, because it's somewhat stressful to have this conversation, I can feel if I lift up my eyebrows a bit, like you might when you're interested in something. I can feel the tremors in my forehead, and that's partly stress induced. So we should probably stop talking.
Yeah, okay. We can call it a day.
Yes. Well, it was good to be able to sit here and have this conversation.
We're going to go eat a steak.
That's the theory.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for talking with me.
Well, thanks for being here. It's been a hell of a year.
Thanks for your help, too.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to give up. And now we're in Belgrade and seem to have found an answer. Thank God.